Joined now by Jack Armstrong and Josh Lewenberg. Fred VanVleet's tenure in Toronto has come to an end, with the 29-year-old joining the Houston Rockets on a 3-year, $130 million max contract. Gentlemen, what do you make of the news, and what legacy does VanVleet leave behind in Toronto?
Well, Jermaine, the news is mind-blowing from an economic perspective. When you think of the numbers, and when you think of the fact that Houston is in a state of Texas with no state income tax, the net benefit to Fred VanVleet and his family is off the charts. This for a guy that was undrafted out of Wichita State. So it's a sensational story for Fred VanVleet, and I think an inspiration to a lot of young people. Obviously, from a Toronto perspective, this is quite a blow. This guy has been a big part of your fabric and the winning culture that they've had here for a long time. He's had a lot of huge moments in big games. And more importantly, he just is such a mature, professional guy. You're going to miss that presence. But nonetheless, hey, for him, from a business perspective, I don't know how anyone could turn a deal like that down.
Yeah, I'm going to start with the legacy because Fred deserves his due. This is a guy that came to Toronto as an undrafted free agent, needed to fight his way onto the roster in training camp, and then in the span of 7 years, he turned himself into an all-star, an NBA champion, a great leader, teammate, culture setter, a cornerstone of the franchise. So he's a Raptors icon. He will always be a Raptors icon. And how about this? He made just over $500,000 in that rookie season. He's going to be making $43 million in each of the next 3 years. So he's bet on himself every step of the way, time and time again. And it's paying out in a way that nobody could have possibly expected, except for probably Fred VanVleet himself. One of the greatest stories in pro sports.
Yeah, simply incredible, and that leadership, I'm sure, is much needed in Houston. Now, the Raptors moved quickly to replace VanVleet at point guard by signing Dennis Schroeder to a 2-year deal. Should we expect any other moves, and what are the next steps for Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster?
Oh, I would imagine there'll be other moves. You got to improve and fill out the secondary pieces of your roster. And, with a guy like Schroeder, who's been a good pro throughout his career, we do have witnessed a lot. We do see a guy like Pascal Siakam and Scotty Barnes handle the ball a lot. I wouldn't be surprised if their role increases that much more in terms of playmaking on this team, because playmaking is going to have to not only be by a guy like Schroeder or Malachi Flynn, it's going to have to be by committee. So needless to say, with the coaching change in Toronto, there'll be some adjustments that have to be made.
Schroeder's a fine player. He's been around. He's a vet in this league. He's coming off a good year with the Lakers. But he would have looked a lot better as a VanVleet backup than a VanVleet replacement. I mean, they were always going to be in a tough spot if Fred left them for nothing, because they don't have cap space. They have the mid-level exception to work with, which is what they're using on Schroeder. I mean, and I said this earlier, regardless of what you think of VanVleet as a player, whether you think he's worth this type of money or not, from an asset management standpoint, this was always the nightmare scenario. And I go back to the trade deadline when the Raptors decided not to move VanVleet. Obviously, they weren't blown away by any of the offers, but they could have gotten something. Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster felt confident at the time that either they could bring him back or that he would want to go to a contending team, one of the teams that doesn't have cap space, that would need to engage them on a sign and trade so that they would get something back. So this was a misread of the player, a misread of the market, and it's the type of asset management blunder that can set a franchise back years.
Now, VanVleet is now gone, but the Raptors were able to re-sign Jakob Poeltl to a 4-year, $80 million deal. Knowing that the team gave up a future first-round pick to acquire him, how important was it for the Raptors to lock up Poeltl?
Absolutely paramount. They had to get him, and he got the number he wanted. They went all in at the trade deadline getting him. They went and got their man. He's a good player, and to me, he's fit what they're trying to do greatly, and they finished 15-10 down the stretch with him. Nonetheless, Fred VanVleet was part of that group that had a little bit of a strong finish down the stretch, so they're going to miss that. The one question you look at with the Raptors right now is where do you go from here in terms of having to improve their roster? Don't forget the fact that Fred VanVleet was a very good shooter, had a down year in terms of shooting the ball, but nonetheless, when you look at their roster, you look at Poeltl, he's more of a traditional big. They're going to have to continue to improve around the edges in any way, shape, or form they can in terms of trying to create more firepower and skill from an offensive perspective, and particularly shooting.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Jack. I don't think they're done. It's still the beginning of July. I mean, from a free agency standpoint, they don't have a ton of flexibility. But even just in the trade market, I mean, this is a roster I think that could potentially look a lot different in a few months from now. The Raptors wanted him back. Poeltl wanted to come back. Both parties were motivated to get something done fairly quickly. Now, the chemistry between VanVleet and Poeltl was excellent towards the end of last season. So I do think Fred being gone hurts Yak a little bit. Again, let's see what comes next, who they surround Poeltl and some of their other pieces with before we judge the merits of this deal and obviously the roster and what it's capable of doing this season and beyond.
It will definitely be an interesting offseason for the Raptors. Gentlemen, thanks for this.